Hi, I'm Inara. My parents said I ruined the family name. They kicked me out of the house when I was 28 for believing my brother. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was realizing they'd known all along about what happened to him, to us. They froze my accounts, called me unstable, tried to buy my silence with a fountain pen and a non-disclosure clause. Then the judge read the warrant, and their faces. They didn't speak, they just froze. What would you do if the people who raised you built their legacy on a lie, then called you the disgrace for uncovering it? The air in Savannah that night was thick enough to slice with a butter knife. July humidity had a way of silencing even the cicadas. The kind of silence that wasn't peaceful. It was expectant, like something holding its breath. I sat on the edge of the antique guest bed in my parents' house, my elbows on my knees, fingers interlocked tight enough to blanch the knuckles. That house had history, not just in its creaky wooden floors and framed black and white photographs lining the hallway, but in the things we didn't talk about. Southern families are good at that, preserving legacies, not just with silverware and stitched monograms, but with secrets. And tonight, something was shifting. It started with a knock, not loud, just 3 gentle taps, like someone testing the air more than announcing their presence. Inara? Jude's voice was tentative, like it had to pass through molasses before it reached me. Come in. The door creaked open, and there he was, my older brother. He looked the same and somehow nothing like himself. Hair a little longer, shoulders hunched, eyes restless like they didn't belong to him anymore. He didn't sit, just stood by the door, chewing on the inside of his cheek. I knew better than to push. We were raised not to make people uncomfortable, even if it killed us. I shouldn't be here, he finally said, almost a whisper. But I didn't know where else to go. I kept my eyes on him, nodding slightly. What happened? He shook his head. It wasn't just me. I blinked. What do you mean? They knew. All of them. Back then. They knew. My mouth went dry. My first instinct was to ask who, what, when. But something in his tone, like glass about to crack, told me to wait. So I did. Because sometimes silence listens better than words. He didn't cry, not really. But there was this film over his eyes, the kind that shows up when someone's been holding their breath for years. And then he turned and walked out, slow and deliberate, like dropping any more weight might shatter him. I didn't follow. I didn't call his name. I just sat there, heartbeats skittering like a squirrel in a trap. For a moment, the house returned to its old stillness, like it hadn't heard him. But I had, and I couldn't unhear it. Later that night, I lay in the same spot, legs curled under the quilt Mom insisted we keep, even though it was too hot for it. My phone buzzed beside me. I expected a news update or an ad. Instead, it was a message from Sadie Withers, someone I hadn't heard from since senior year. Can't believe Jude finally told someone. We all made that pact. I reread it 3 times, blinking. A pact? What the hell was she talking about? Another message popped in seconds later. Just keep your mouth shut like the rest of us. A cold sweat ran along my spine. I stared at the screen, not moving. The phrase stuck in my chest like a fishbone. We all made that pact. I started typing, then stopped. What was I going to say? What pact? What did Jude tell you? Why didn't you ever say anything? No, that would only give away that I knew something, that I was involved, or worse, trying to dig. I dropped the phone on the nightstand and reached for my journal. It had been years since I'd written anything that wasn't a grocery list or a to-do item at work, but now my hands moved with certainty. The pen scratched across the page like it had been waiting. When trauma speaks, I wrote, it doesn't start with facts. It starts with tremors. Outside the window, the streetlights cast thin gold shadows across the driveway. I thought of Jude's eyes again, not afraid, just tired. The floor creaked in the hallway. I froze. It was my father. He walked past without a word, but as he passed the crack in my door, he glanced in. Just a flick of the eye, not long, not lingering, but long enough for me to feel it. And I knew. And he already knew, maybe not the details, but the weight, the shame, the buried part of this family we all knew existed but never named. That moment of eye contact didn't say, "What's wrong?" It said, "You heard it too." After he disappeared down the hall, I exhaled, slowly. I leaned back against the headboard, phone in hand. I didn't scroll. I didn't respond. I just stared at the screen's faint glow, casting a soft light on the ceiling above me. And I whispered, just to the air, because no one else needed to hear it. If even half of what Jude said is true, I'm standing in a house built on silence. The next morning, I woke with my heart already pacing. The ceiling above me felt lower somehow, the air heavier. I wasn't sure if it was the heat or the words Jude had left suspended in the air the night before. They knew. That sentence played on a loop in my chest like a warning siren no one else could hear. By 7:30, the summer light had pushed its way through the sheer curtains, casting a golden hue on the floorboards of the hallway. The air outside buzzed with the sound of cicadas waking up with purpose, but inside, everything felt muted. I didn't want breakfast. I didn't want coffee. I didn't want conversation. I just wanted answers. I left my room quietly, robe still cinched at the waist, bare feet making no sound on the old floorboards. I passed the staircase, the antique grandfather clock, then paused by the closed door of my parents' room. That's when I heard her voice. "I told you," my mother said, her tone sharp, like a blade dulled from too much use. Jude always had that imagination, but we don't stir the past. Not now. My breath hitched. A pause, then my father's voice, lower, measured. "And if she talks?" There was silence. Not the kind that begs for attention, but the kind that confirms everything without saying another word. I didn't move. My fingers curled into my palms. I backed away slowly, retracing my steps like I had never been there. Back in my room, I sat on the edge of the bed, fists still clenched. That wasn't ignorance I had heard. That was complicity. They knew. Not only about Jude, they had talked about it, planned how to keep it hidden, and now I was the liability. I couldn't sit still. I walked outside, down the stone path toward the backyard swing. It used to belong to my grandmother Agnes. She'd sit there and shell peas or just hum to herself while I played in the grass. Now the wood creaked under my weight, groaning like it didn't want to hold me either. The words I'd overheard replayed in my head until they made me sick. We don't stir the past. No, they buried it, then pretended the ground never shifted. Denial isn't peace. It's rot in disguise. That's what my therapist once told me. I'd laughed then. I wasn't laughing now. Around noon, I went back inside. The house felt emptier than it was. I passed the sitting room and checked my phone. A notification popped up. An Instagram story from Cresa. I tapped it. The image was a blurred family portrait. Our family. Cropped tight on mom and dad, with her smiling beside them. The caption read, "Some people will lie for attention. Don't be fooled by crocodile tears." Underneath were reactions, heart emojis, sad emojis, comments like, "So sad what she's doing to her parents," and "disgraceful." The implication was as loud as a scream. I was the liar now. I sat down slowly on the armrest of the couch. My face flushed, not from guilt, but from the rage of being rewritten in real time. Cressida hadn't called me, hadn't asked a damn thing, but she'd told the world who to believe. My phone buzzed again. A missed call from Aunt Margot. I called back. No answer. I tried once more, then checked my messages. Nothing. When I went to send another text, I saw it. She'd unfriended me. That was fast. I stared at the contact screen for a moment, then dropped the phone beside me. My hands felt cold, but my skin was hot. That's the thing about being cast out. It doesn't take a jury, just a whisper. One suggestion that you're dangerous, one social post, and suddenly the silence turns into absence. I opened my notebook, not the journal, a fresh one. On the first page, I drew a tree, roots thick, branches tangled. I started listing names, family, friends, people who had been there, people who might have seen something, heard something, knew something. Then I circled the ones I believed had known but said nothing. There were too many circles. Truth without strategy is just another scream into the void, I wrote at the top, then underlined it twice. I wasn't going to scream. I was going to prepare. As I sat back, the breeze caught the edge of the notebook, flipping a page forward. I stared at the blank sheet for a moment, then my phone buzzed again, a new notification, incoming call, Jude Ashcroft. I swallowed, hesitated, then picked it up. "Hey," he said, breath tight. "What's wrong?" A pause, then quietly, "I think I remember something else, and it's worse than I told you." Jude's voice cracked through the speaker like he wasn't sure if he should be talking to me or confessing to a wall. "It was at one of those church luncheons," he began, quiet and shaky. "I was supposed to be upstairs, but I came down to grab a soda, and I heard them." I shifted the phone to my other ear, sitting on the edge of the swing in our backyard, just like the morning before. The wood groaned beneath me, like it too was tired of holding things. "They were in the hallway," he said. "Mom, Dad, and Pastor Glenn, talking low but clear enough. And Mom said, we can't let this ruin everything we've built." He went silent again. I let it sit, then asked, "Do you know what she meant by this?" Another pause. "Not just me," he whispered. "It wasn't just me." I closed my eyes. That sentence, it dropped into my chest like a stone into a lake. The ripples were immediate. I thought of the way my aunt wouldn't make eye contact. The side comments at Christmas that didn't make sense. The constant need to maintain an image so shiny, so perfectly Southern, it could blind you to the rot underneath. "I need to go," Jude mumbled. Just don't tell anyone yet, please." "Okay," I said. "But Jude?" "Yeah?" "I'm not dropping this." He didn't respond, just the click of the call ending. I stayed there, long after the line went dead, trying to breathe through the noise building in my head. Then something surfaced, a memory I didn't know I still had, 5 years ago. The Langdon family picnic, dozens of cousins running through grass, uncles manning grills, folding chairs and pastel tablecloths. I remembered watching Jude sitting alone under the magnolia tree, a paper plate balanced on his knees, picking at food he wasn't eating. I remembered Mom whispering to Aunt Vivian, glancing toward Jude. And that look, like Jude wasn't just the disappointment of the family, but a reminder of something they'd rather forget. "You don't see patterns until you revisit the silence," I murmured to myself. That evening, my parents invited me to dinner, just the 4 of us. "Nothing fancy," my mother said, "just family." The table was set neatly, candles flickering like we were expecting guests, though we weren't. Vera poured wine like she always did, elegant, controlled. Clive unfolded his napkin and cleared his throat as if preparing for a board meeting. "So," I said after the first bites were done, "Jude called me this morning." Mom's eyes flicked up, a beat too fast. "Oh," she said, swirling her glass. "He remembered something from years ago, about a conversation with you two, and Pastor Glenn." The room dropped 10 degrees. Vera set her wine down carefully. "Why are we dredging up things that serve no one?" "I think they serve Jude," I replied. "And maybe the rest of us who have questions." "You want to talk about questions?" she snapped. "Fine. Why do you insist on tarnishing everything this family has worked for?" I didn't flinch. "I didn't tarnish anything. I'm trying to understand what's already broken." Clive, up until now a statue, finally spoke. "Jude's stories are best left buried." I looked at him. "You mean the truth?" His jaw tightened. "You're becoming a liability, Inara." That word, liability, landed harder than anything else he'd ever said to me. My aunt, who joined without fanfare halfway through dinner, chimed in from the other end. Just like her grandmother, always stirring trouble for attention. I stared at my plate. At the roast chicken, the buttered corn, the illusion of a normal meal. And then I stood up. I'd rather be disowned than complicit. The scrape of my chair echoed louder than anything else in the room. I didn't look back as I walked out. I left dessert untouched, their glasses still full, the masks on their faces slipping just enough to see what was underneath. Back in my childhood bedroom, I sat on the bed in the same robe from the morning. My journal was open in seconds. "Truth doesn't need permission," I wrote, "but exposing it will cost everything." I remembered a quote I'd once saved on a sticky note during a college seminar. "Your silence will not protect you." Audre Lorde had written that. She knew something about survival, about fire under skin. I stared out the window as night wrapped the neighborhood in shadows, the kind that stretch long and settle heavy. Before turning off the lamp, I checked my email one last time. There it was. Subject: urgent. Langdon Estate, legal request for signature. The moment I opened the attachment, my chest tightened so fast it took a full minute before I could breathe normally again. The PDF loaded slowly, like it somehow knew it carried poison. The heading read, Langdon Family Trust, Voluntary Declination and Legacy Preservation Agreement. I didn't need to read the rest to understand what it was, but I did anyway. Each line more surgical than the last. Stripped of emotion, it asked me to step away, not just from money, but from truth, from bloodlines, from memory, from any public statement that might compromise the integrity of the Langdon family's historical standing. There it was, in black and white. The undersigned agrees to refrain from public allegations or statements henceforth. I read that sentence 3 times. So they wanted my silence, officially, permanently, as if it could be bought like old china in an estate sale. I didn't call anyone, not Jude, not Malis, not even Sadie. Instead, I printed it. I folded the document precisely, creased it edge to edge, and laid it on the kitchen table like a crime scene photo. I stared at it while sipping coffee that had gone cold 2 sips in. The whole house was silent except for the sound of the air conditioning kicking on. It shouldn't have felt symbolic, but somehow it did, like the house itself was bracing for impact. "You only ask for silence when you fear what I might say," I muttered. "And you're right to be afraid." By early afternoon, I needed groceries, more as an excuse to be around people than necessity. I grabbed my tote and headed to the corner market. It wasn't crowded. A few locals were browsing, a mother herding her kids away from the candy aisle. I moved through each section slowly, my mind still orbiting around the document on my table. I paid at the self-checkout like always, scanned everything, inserted my debit card, waited, declined. That blinking message felt louder than it should have. I tried again. Same result. The woman behind me shifted her weight and offered a polite smile, pretending not to notice. I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app. The joint trust account, the one I was told I'd always have access to, it was locked. A red warning banner appeared at the top. Access restricted. Please contact family counsel. Then a text. Per legal advisement. Temporary suspension pending resolution of estate compliance. My grip tightened around the phone, not out of panic, but clarity. This wasn't damage control. This was a preemptive strike. They moved too fast, too smoothly. They had this planned. I left the groceries right there on the register and walked out. Back home, I sat at the kitchen table again, staring at the folded document like it might speak if I stayed quiet long enough. And then, like water rising to the surface, the memory came back, uninvited, unfiltered. 2 years ago. It was a Wednesday night dinner. I had asked one question about a church donation that didn't add up on the books. Nothing accusatory, just a number that seemed off. Mom had put her fork down slowly. Then maybe you should pack a bag and go find a family you can trust, she'd said. Arms folded, eyes cold. I laughed at the time. Thought she was bluffing. She wasn't. 15 minutes later, I was standing at the front door with a duffel bag and my laptop. Dad hadn't said a word. He just turned off the porch light as I stepped into the dark. I remember the sound my suitcase made as it rolled down the driveway, like it wasn't quite sure if it belonged to me. That night, as I sat in the guest room of a friend's place, I whispered aloud, "The only inheritance I took with me was my own spine." Now, 2 years later, they were trying to take that too. I grabbed my phone, snapped photos of every page of the document, and uploaded them to my drive. Then I made a list on a yellow legal pad. Lawyer Bank Jude evidence. This wasn't going to be a scream in the dark. This was going to be a case file. "They think I'll beg," I said aloud, mostly to the room. "They forget who raised me with that kind of pride." My fingers traced the edge of the paper, and I recalled a quote I'd once seen scrawled on a gas station wall outside Charleston. "Never push a loyal person to the point they no longer care." And just as I picked up my phone to begin drafting my email to Malis, a new message pinged into my inbox. Subject: Medical Records, Jude Ashcroft, confidential. I clicked the file expecting a standard report, maybe a doctor's note or a clinic log. What opened made the room feel smaller by the second. Jude's name was there, bold and sterile at the top. A date from 12 years ago. A diagnosis. Dissociative episode linked to trauma exposure. Recommended, continued psychiatric observation. And beneath it, underlined twice in red ink. Patient exhibits memory suppression consistent with protective psychological response. They knew, they had known all along, about what happened, about the weight Jude carried. And they did what Langdons do. They put it in a file, labeled it, and shoved it into a drawer. My whisper barely reached the walls, but it tasted like steel. They buried it in his chart. I sat there frozen for a minute, then stood up slowly, like my body remembered what anger felt like. The doorbell rang about an hour later. A courier, dressed in navy and polite discomfort, handed me a large envelope with the Langdon family seal embossed in wax. His eyes flicked toward me like he wanted to say something, but all he managed was, "Have a good day." Inside the envelope was another legal document. This one was thicker, bolder. Consent for voluntary forfeiture of estate claims. Attached to it was a fountain pen, brass-tipped, engraved with our family crest. Tucked between the pages was a sticky note. "You'll do what's best, for everyone's peace. Cresa." I didn't scream. I didn't tear it up or call anyone. I laughed. One sharp, incredulous laugh that echoed off the walls of my apartment like a gunshot. They still thought this was about money. They still believed they could outmaneuver me with velvet threats. They think silence is peace, I muttered, but I know it's permission. The next morning, I was halfway through a lukewarm cup of tea when my phone rang. "Hi, this is Cynthia from Palmetto Wellness Center," the voice chirped. "Just calling to confirm your intake appointment scheduled for Friday at 10 o'clock a.m. You were referred by—" "Vera Langdon?" My hand tightened around the mug. "Excuse me?" "Yes, we have your chart here. Initial evaluation, flagged for family concern regarding behavioral instability and trauma response denial. Cancel it." A pause. "Ma'am? Cancel the appointment, permanently, and tell Vera, I'm not the one who's sick." I ended the call before she could sputter another word. I stood in my kitchen for a long time after that. The sun crawled up the tile wall, glinting off the edge of the countertop. My thoughts weren't racing, they were lining up. Everything was starting to make sense. The forced smiles, the carefully selected events I wasn't invited to, the slow erasure. Agnes had warned me once. We were on the back porch, shelling peas in silence. She looked over, eyes sharp behind thick lenses. "They don't just silence you, darling," she said. "They write your silence for you." She'd seen this coming long before I had. Now I understood just how detailed their script really was. I sat down, opened my laptop, and drafted a new email to Malis. Subject: Statement of Intent. I laid it all out. The forged referral, the document pressuring me to sign away my name, the medical records that proved they'd known Jude was telling the truth. At the top of the page, I typed one quote and left it bolded. "Reputation is what people think of you. Character is what you know about yourself." Michelle Obama. My hand hovered over the send button for just a second before pressing it. Done. That's when someone knocked. I turned my head toward the door, heart still steady. The knock was slow, deliberate. Through the peephole, I saw my father, Clive Langdon, holding another manila envelope in his left hand. He didn't knock like a father. He knocked like a man doing a job he didn't want to do. When I opened the door, Clive stood stiffly, one hand gripping a manila envelope like it was a stack of eviction papers. He didn't greet me, didn't ask how I was. "Your mother wanted to handle this quietly," he said flatly. "But since you're forcing our hand—" I stepped aside without a word. He walked in like a stranger. He placed the envelope on my kitchen counter and slid it toward me. "That's the final offer. It includes an addendum to your previous agreement." "I didn't agree to anything," I said. He didn't respond, just tapped the envelope once with 2 fingers and took a step back like it might explode. I opened it. Inside was a single-page letter outlining a revised cash settlement offer. The number was almost insulting, generous enough to make the unsteady hesitate, but not nearly enough to buy what they were trying to bury. Paper clipped to the top was a Postit note. Mom's handwriting. "You were always smart. Use that now." I looked up. "Would you sell your silence if it meant your son never got to speak?" His eyes flickered, but he didn't answer. "Get out," I said. He lingered, searching my face for something. Regret, maybe. A crack. He didn't find one. The door shut behind him without ceremony. The second he left, I walked straight to the safe I'd nearly forgotten was even there, tucked behind an old row of cookbooks in my closet. I spun the dial with muscle memory and opened it. Inside, beneath a stack of expired passports and a box of baby teeth I never had the heart to throw out, was a yellowed envelope. Agnes had handed it to me 2 years before she passed. "Only when you're no longer afraid," she'd whispered. I opened it slowly. Inside were 3 things. A handwritten note from Jude, a Polaroid photo of his back marked with bruises like constellations, and a cassette tape. Yes, a cassette. Jude had always liked analog, said it made secrets feel safer. I found my old tape player and hit play, static at first, then his voice, raw and breaking. "If you're hearing this, something happened," he said. "I'm sorry I didn't say anything sooner. I thought maybe if I kept quiet it would stop. But it didn't. If I disappear, please don't let them say it was just his fault." My knees gave out. I sank to the floor, the tape still playing beside me. His voice cracked in and out as he described one night in chilling, specific detail. They knew, and they did nothing. By evening, I had everything laid out on my dining table like evidence for trial. The letter, the photo, the audio, the 2 envelopes, one from Clive, one from Agnes. One tried to buy me off, the other begged me to act. I took photos of everything, uploaded it all to encrypted cloud storage, double-backed it onto a secure drive Malis had once helped me set up, just in case. Then I called her. "I want to move forward," I told her. "I'm ready to reopen the case." No hesitation in her voice. "Let's get started." Later that night, I opened the county clerk's website. It moved slowly, typical outdated government tech, but it loaded. I found the portal to refile sealed abuse claims. Jude's name already existed in the system. His file had a digital dust layer over it. I clicked New Submission, attached the files, typed a brief summary, double-checked everything. My cursor hovered over the button. "Are you certain you wish to proceed?" the site asked. I clicked Yes. Seconds later, "Your request has been received. You will be contacted within 72 hours. I stared at the confirmation screen, then stood up, walked outside, and let the night swallow me whole. The air was still humid. Crickets screamed from every bush. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked. "No more shame," I said quietly to no one. "No more silence. No more secrets." The streetlight flickered overhead. I remembered a quote scrawled on Agnes's old kitchen wall, handwritten in faded Sharpie. "The truth will set you free, but first, it will piss you off." Gloria Steinem. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. New message. Unknown number. "You think you're smart? Keep pushing, and you'll regret it." I stared at the message. The words burned into the screen like embers that refused to die down. "You think you're smart. Keep pushing, and you'll regret it." But fear wasn't what I felt. It was clarity. I set the phone down on the counter and took a slow breath, grounding myself in the stillness of the kitchen. The clock ticked louder than usual, and the fridge hummed like it was trying to fill the silence that followed. That's when I grabbed my phone again, not to respond, but to check something else. Instagram. I shouldn't have, but I did. Cressida's face was the first thing that popped up. Polished, framed by perfect lighting and faux vulnerability. Her story had just gone live. A soft piano melody played under the caption. "Not everyone who calls themselves family acts like it. Some people burn bridges and then cry when no one comes to the rescue." The photo. A cropped image of Mom and Dad from our last public family event, smiling as if they hadn't been the architects of silence. The comments were already pouring in. "So heartbreaking what she's doing to you guys. Stay strong, truth always comes out. Families have bumps, but no one deserves this kind of betrayal." Narrative control. Weaponized perception. I expected distance from them, but this was war. My phone buzzed again. A text from Bethany, one of the women from the church prayer circle. "You've always been a good girl, Inara. Don't ruin that. We all stumble, but family is sacred. Sacred? Another ping. My old boss from the downtown clinic. Maybe take a beat. Let things cool down before you dig deeper. Reputation's like glass, you know? Their words piled on like soft bricks. Each polite, each coded, each drenched in fear of truth. I muttered to myself, when the truth threatens power, people always back the powerful first. Later that afternoon, my voicemail notification blinked. One new message, no caller ID. I hit play, ready for another lecture. But instead, a quiet, tired voice filled the room. "This is Dolores Mendez. I heard what they're doing to you." I froze. Dolores had worked in our house for 15 years. Quiet, invisible to them, but not to me. "I saw more than I should have," she continued. "I was told to stay quiet, and I did. But I still have my journal, and I'm willing to talk." Her voice cracked at the end, but I heard something else too. Resolve. We met that evening at a tiny diner on the outskirts of town. She wore a sun hat and kept looking over her shoulder like someone might recognize her. I slid into the booth and waited. She pulled a faded notebook from her canvas bag and placed it gently on the table between us. "I wrote everything," she said. "Dates, bruises, conversations." I opened it slowly. Dated entries from 10, 12, even 15 years ago. Descriptions of Jude crying in the laundry room. Notes about late-night arguments between my parents. One entry read, "Mrs. Langdon told me to burn the bedsheet, said it was no one else's business." I looked up at her. "Why now?" She took a sip of her tea, hands shaking slightly. "Because I saw what they did to you, and because they don't forgive, but I don't want to carry this anymore." "Thank you," I whispered. "You didn't have to." "I did," she interrupted. "Because I remember you helping me carry groceries when no one else looked twice. You always saw people." Her eyes welled, but she blinked it away. They made me feel like speaking up would ruin me, but silence already did. Back home, I laid the notebook on my desk. I opened my encrypted drive and scanned each page, uploaded it, filed it. Then I opened my voice recorder and spoke aloud. "If they're building walls faster than I can knock them down, maybe it's time to bring floodlights instead." I emailed everything to Melis and included one line in bold at the bottom. "We move tomorrow." Before bed, I read through one more entry from Dolores's notebook. This one was about me. Inara asked me once why I always looked so tired. I told her grown-ups just forget how to rest. I lied. I closed the notebook gently, walked to the window, and looked out at the street light flickering against the branches of the old oak tree. Then the knock came. Hard, fast, sharp. My pulse spiked. A voice from the other side, loud and clear. "Open up. Now." I didn't move. The knock still echoed in my bones, but I stayed still, clutching my phone tight as if the plastic case could anchor me. I started recording, not because I thought something would happen, but because I no longer trusted anything that came from the other side of a door. When I opened it, it wasn't a threat. It was a courier in a pressed navy uniform holding a silver-trimmed envelope. "Miss Langdon?" he asked, eyes downcast. "Special delivery." He didn't wait for a signature, just handed it to me and walked away like his job depended on disappearing quickly. Inside the envelope, thick cardstock, Langdon Foundation, annual gala. A gala I hadn't been invited to in 5 years. The words, "Celebrating our family's legacy of integrity," were embossed in gold. Tucked inside was a smaller card, handwritten in Cresida's looping script. "Show up or you'll only prove us right." I held it between my fingers, shaking slightly. Not from nerves, from disgust. Legacy. I had receipts. I wore black, nothing flashy, just clean, sharp, deliberate. I stood near the back of the ballroom, away from the floral centerpieces and soft jazz quartet. The Langdons were masters of illusion, gold accents, fake laughter, and polished speeches. Vera took the stage under a wash of spotlight. Her voice was smooth as always, the kind that makes strangers lean in. Our family has always stood for truth, grace, and dignity. And right then, like a cue from some divine playwright, a door opened at the back of the ballroom. 2 uniformed U.S. Marshals entered. One walked straight toward Clive, who stood frozen near the edge of the stage. The other marched up to the podium. A ripple spread through the room. Gasps, murmurs, cameras lifted discreetly. "This is an official subpoena," the marshal announced, "by order of the Superior Court of Chatham County, related to sealed abuse filings." You could have heard a pin drop. Clive reached out with shaking hands. Vera didn't speak. Her mouth opened, but her voice caught somewhere between denial and disbelief. Cresa, dressed in champagne silk, had already pulled out her phone. She angled it toward the chaos and started recording. "No live streaming during legal enforcement," one officer said sharply, stepping between her and the podium. Her hand dropped like it had been slapped. The entire event paused, an orchestra without a conductor. Donors exchanged glances. Whispers passed like sparks across dry grass. I didn't move. I stood by the exit, back straight, breathing even. This wasn't revenge. This was exposure. You hid the truth under chandeliers and press releases, I thought, watching Vera's white-knuckled grip on the edge of the podium. But it walked in anyway. After the marshals left, the ballroom didn't return to normal. It couldn't. A woman I didn't know, maybe a donor or family friend, walked up to me with tears in her eyes. "I always knew something didn't feel right," she whispered before walking away. Another leaned in close. "You're brave, but they're not done yet." I didn't reply, just nodded. As the crowd thinned, murmuring in tight circles, I stepped outside into the warm night air. The city buzzed around the hotel, traffic, footsteps, distant laughter, but it all felt muted. I wasn't triumphant. I was grounded. What had happened in that room wasn't the end. It was the unveiling. Justice is not revenge. It's the restoration of what should never have been broken. That night, back in my apartment, I poured a glass of water and sank into the couch. I opened my phone to a new message. From Melis. "We need to talk." The documents just uncovered something bigger. The next morning, I sat across from Melis in her office, sunlight pooling across the worn rug, the hum of the ceiling fan slicing through silence like a dull blade. Her mug read, "Justice is earned." She didn't smile when she pushed the thick folder across the desk. She didn't have to. "This," she said quietly, "was never just about Jude." I opened it slowly. Inside were scanned letters, timestamps, official statements, medical reports, some of which I recognized, most of which I didn't. But one envelope made my hands stop moving. Postmarked the week before Jude's first hospitalization, addressed to Clive and Vera Langdon, unopened. My throat went dry. I reached for it. The handwriting was shaky but unmistakably his. Jude's. "Go ahead," Melis said. "I've already read it." I slid the page out gently, as if it might disintegrate if I looked too directly. "If you ever read this," it began, "it means I still believe you care. I'm sorry for the burden, but I didn't ask to be the shame you never wanted to claim." My eyes didn't tear up. They burned. I blinked, not to hold it in, but to see clearly. "He begged," I whispered, "and they filed it away like junk mail." Melis didn't speak. Her silence said enough. I turned to the next piece, a photocopy of a leather-bound notebook. The header said, Jude Ashcroft, personal journal, age 15 to 17. Agnes had it in a trunk, Malis said. Found after her funeral, under blankets. She never told anyone. I flipped through it. Pages of pain mapped out in teenage scrawl. Details of emotional manipulation, silent punishments, the bruises explained away as sports accidents, the gaslighting dressed up as discipline. One entry, Mom told me if I ever spoke, no one would believe me, that I'd make things worse for Inara, so I stopped talking. Another, Inara's too young. I hope she never sees me like this. She still believes in birthday cards and bedtime stories. I stopped there. He was protecting me, I said quietly, and I didn't even know he needed it. The weight of that realization was suffocating. All the moments I thought he was just quiet, distant, moody. He was bleeding silently while the rest of us pretended not to notice. I closed the folder, slowly, deliberately, then stood. I need air. I walked out of her office and wandered down to Forsyth Park, the notebook still in my bag. The Spanish moss swayed above me like a warning. Every tree I passed carried echoes of Jude's silences, of family dinners where his name was spoken like a liability, not a person. Every step I took peeled back another layer of pretense. Some truths don't come back to haunt, they come back to rescue. I called him. He answered on the second ring. Inara? I know everything. Silence. I read the letter, the journal, all of it. He exhaled, sharp, like he'd been holding it since he was 16. I'm not just going to expose them, I said. I'm going to end the cycle. That night, I wrote a statement, not for Facebook, not for damage control. A formal public release through Malis's office. We would send it to press outlets, attach evidence, force them into the light they avoided for decades. I typed, "The truth will not be whispered, it will be heard." As I hovered over the Submit Request button for the press conference, my laptop chimed. New email. Subject, urgent. Langdon Estate freezes all financial assets. Action required immediately. I stared at the screen. The timing wasn't a coincidence. They were done being subtle, and I was done playing scared. They were done being subtle, and I was done playing scared. The next morning, I walked into the bank with the same calm I'd used to cut meat at a holiday dinner. Steady, restrained, surgical. The woman behind the counter wore the practiced smile of someone who'd been warned ahead of time. "I'm here to check on account access," I said, placing my ID on the marble counter. She took it, typed something, frowned. "It appears your authorization has been removed from all Langdon-linked accounts. There's a hold in place pending internal family dispute resolution." Internal dispute resolution. Every word a euphemism for erasure. "Could you repeat that?" I asked, reaching for my phone and pressing record. She hesitated. I'm sorry, Miss Langdon. I'm just reading what's here." "That's all right. Keep reading." Afterwards, I uploaded the audio to Malis. No commentary, no caption. She'd know exactly what it meant. "They wanted war," I muttered, stepping back out into the sun. "Ma, they just didn't think I'd come with armor." That afternoon, the Savannah Tribune dropped a digital bomb. Savannah's first family faces allegations of decades-long abuse cover-up. The headline spread like wildfire across social media. Within the hour, quotes from Jude's journals were circulating, specific entries, dates, the transcript from the subpoena reading at the gala. There was even a screenshot of the refiled claim number from the county clerk's website, linked directly to me. The reaction was immediate. Cresa shut off her comment sections. Vera issued a carefully worded statement. Our family has endured betrayal beyond words. We ask for privacy and compassion during this time. Clive? He vanished from public life completely. I sat on the edge of my bed, scrolling through it all. I wasn't sure if the ache in my stomach was relief or rage. Probably both. They want me to feel guilty for opening the freezer door, I murmured, but they're the ones who left bodies in it. That evening, Dolores Mendez stepped into the light. Her video deposition, filmed at Melis's firm, hit the internet just after 5. It was simple. A straight-on shot of her, seated with hands in her lap. She looked scared, but she didn't stutter. I worked for the Langdon family from 1998 until 2013, she said. I was told, repeatedly, that what happened in that house stayed in that house. I was told that if I opened my mouth, I'd never find work again. She listed names, dates, specific incidents. She described bruises, screams through closed doors, conversations she wasn't meant to hear but did. But what I saw, she said, voice firming like a spine straightening, I can't bury it anymore. The clip went viral within hours, and suddenly I wasn't alone anymore. Letters began to arrive, some unsigned, some scrawled in nervous handwriting. Thank you. He did it to my brother, too. My daughter always feared your family. Now I know why. One mother stopped me outside the grocery store. She grabbed my hand and held it too tight. Whatever they do next, she said, don't stop. I nodded, not because I needed validation, but because I finally understood what it meant to be heard. Later that week, I walked into the same church I was baptized in. I didn't go to pray. I didn't light a candle. I just sat in the back pew and stared at the stained glass window, the one I used to think looked like heaven bleeding. The room was quiet, save for the creak of wood under my legs. They taught me to respect legacy. I've decided to rebuild one. As I stepped outside, the air felt different, sharper, brighter. The kind of air that belongs to people who survived something most others still pretend doesn't exist. Back home, I was barely out of my shoes when the phone rang. Melis. We need to meet, she said. Vera is requesting a mediation hearing. She wants to talk family to family. Family, she said, as if the word still meant anything we hadn't already burned. Family, she said, as if the word still meant anything we hadn't already burned. The hearing was set for 9:00 a.m. I arrived 10 minutes early, wearing gray slacks and a beige blouse, neutral colors for a room already drained of warmth. Downtown Savannah never looked as sterile as it did that morning. The glass conference room inside the legal building had no personality, just chairs, paper, and people pretending this wasn't war disguised as negotiation. Melis sat beside me, calm as always, her binder closed, but her phone recording in her bag, just in case. On the other side of the table, Vera sat rigid, back straight, hair shellacked to perfection. Clive looked older, not tired, hollow. He didn't lift his eyes once. No greetings, no pleasantries, just the cold shuffling of paper and the scrape of pens uncapped with intention. We're here, the mediator began, at the request of Mrs. Vera Langdon, to seek a mutually agreeable resolution to the present family conflict. Vera leaned forward. There have been misunderstandings, and the public nature of things has spiraled. We hoped to contain this before irreparable damage was done. I waited. Let the silence expand. Clive didn't speak. I looked directly at him. Say something. He didn't look up. Vera turned to him. Clive. Only then did he glance at me, briefly, long enough for me to register the flicker in his eyes, Not anger, not denial, but defeat. Shame, maybe. Or worse, fear. Fear that none of this would go away, that they wouldn't be remembered as they wanted, no matter how hard they rewrote the story. That look wasn't for me. It was for the legacy slipping from his grip. I took out the sheet I had prepared and began reading. What happened to Jude was not an exception. It was a pattern. A pattern reinforced by silence, rationalized by power, and enabled by all of you. Vera opened her mouth, but I raised my hand. Your silence let it flourish. You called it protection. It was preservation of your image, not your children. I paused, then folded the page slowly. I am not here to ask for anything, not an apology, not inclusion. I am taking back my name, what it means, what it stands for, and I am doing so without any of your permission. Malus nodded. We have prepared an agreement that relinquishes any future claim to the estate while affirming full legal autonomy and ownership of all released documentation and testimony. Inara will not be silenced. In exchange, she declines any Langdon inheritance. Vera signed quickly, her eyes fixed on a corner of the table like it owed her an explanation. Clive's hand hovered over the paper. I watched as his fingers trembled just slightly before he pressed the pen down and signed. It was done. As I gathered my things, Cressida appeared at the far end of the hallway. She wasn't part of the hearing. She didn't need to be. She stood there, phone raised, not recording, but watching. Her expression held no fury, just calculation. As if archiving me was her way of staying in control. Let them document my strength. They've recorded enough of my silence. Outside, I took off my shoes. The sidewalk was warm beneath my feet. The sun overhead was unforgiving in the best way. Clear, clean, unfiltered. It wasn't grief, it was relief. When a door finally closes and you realize it's one you never needed to reopen, you don't mourn it, you breathe. Sometimes walking away is the only way forward. When I got home, there was a small envelope wedged into the doorframe. I pulled it free, sat down on my couch, and opened it slowly. Inside was a drawing, crayon on faded construction paper, a tree, its roots deep, its branches stretching beyond the edge of the page. On the back, Jude's handwriting, keep growing, no matter what they cut down. The tree wasn't just roots, it was proof I had survived everything that tried to bury me, and now it was time to tell the world. 1 month later, I stood backstage at the National Conference on Family Advocacy in Atlanta. The air buzzed not from nerves, but the weight of truth waiting to be spoken. I had been invited as the keynote speaker, a title I never asked for, but one I knew I had earned. The crowd gathered quietly, survivors, advocates, journalists, people who understood the language of silence and the cost of breaking it. And near the front, in the second row, sat Jude, hands clasped, eyes steady. We didn't speak before. We didn't need to. The MC introduced me with a short, respectful nod. I stepped onto the stage, adjusted the mic, and let the room still itself. My family taught me to keep secrets, I said. That first sentence dropped like a stone into water. The silence afterward wasn't awkward, it was intentional. People were leaning in. I stand here today because I finally chose the truth over tradition. I spoke slowly, deliberately, reading directly from Jude's journal, the entries that never made it to family dinners or Christmas cards. I read about bruises, ignored cries, the quiet cruelty of being dismissed by the people who were supposed to love you first. Halfway through, I unfolded the letter, the one Jude had written to our parents years ago, the one they never opened. I'm sorry for the burden, But I didn't ask to be the shame you never wanted to claim, I read aloud. A few audible gasps broke the silence. Then I looked up. This was never just about one boy, I said. It's about how silence makes monsters and how truth, hard, inconvenient truth, builds survivors. A beat, then applause, first polite, then swelling. Some people stood, others wept quietly in their seats. Jude stayed seated, but his face, wet and open, said everything. In the weeks that followed, the world responded. Clive resigned from every public board he served on. Vera, under increasing pressure, released a formal retraction. Donations to the Langdon Foundation dwindled. Anonymous sponsors pulled support. It was a fall not of spectacle, but of structure. And it was overdue. I didn't gloat. I didn't even speak publicly again after that, because the work had already been done. And it wasn't about me. It was about the quiet acts of justice that followed. A woman from Missouri sent an email. Because of your story, I believed my son. A former Langdon staffer published a blog post. We all knew, and we're sorry we said nothing. And in Chatham County, a judge reopened 5 sealed abuse cases from the 1990s, citing my testimony as a precedent. That spring, I went back to my grandmother's old backyard, the one I now owned after a state arbitration. I stood beside the tree she once tended, the one whose bark still bore the marks of rope swings and childhood wishes. And I planted another one, smaller, new, just beginning. Roots break concrete if they must. I'm proof. I watched the soil settle around the base and whispered to the wind, "You don't get to call me bitter. You don't get to call this regret. What I did was survival. What I've become, that's strength." I turned and walked back across the lawn. Sunlight spilled through the branches behind me. The legacy I carry now, it's the one I wrote myself.